Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Mariam Baksh. I'm a staff correspondent at NextGov. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to today's event, Cyber Infrastructure Under Fire, underwritten by Rubrik. Today, we'll discuss how COVID-19 has revealed the capabilities and infrastructure not yet in place to support fully remote working, and what agencies across all levels of government can do during this uniquely trying time to shore up cyber vulnerabilities and prevent threats. We'll also explore some of the preparations officials took to prepare for elections, what it would take to put ransomware protections and cybersecurity infrastructure in place in order to have more secure remote work, and more, I think. But before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of the platform, you'll find several icons, including the Q&A tab, which allows you to ask a question. We'll be fielding those to the end of the program, but feel free to submit any questions at any point along the way. If you experience any technical difficulties, please contact us by chatting with the hosts listed in the platform chat function. Now, joining us today are Ohio Secretary of State Frank LaRose, Rita Reynolds, Chief Technology Officer at the National Association of Counties, and Tim Romer, Arizona's Chief Information Security Officer. Thanks, all of you. Let's dive right in. I think I want to start in traditional fashion, asking our panelists to do a quick introduction of their role. And say what's been keeping them busy in the last couple of days. Let's start with Secretary LaRose, if that's okay.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you so much, everybody. Really appreciate the opportunity to join you all for this conversation. Of course, we are at the 1 week point where 1 week ago, with, of course, the eyes of the world on us, Ohio conducted a very smooth and accessible election, as all 49 other states did as well. For us, it was really a lot of preparation that helped bring us to the point where we were ready to have a smooth election here in the Buckeye State. And I'm proud to say that because of the preparations that we've made, things went quite well. We recruited a massive new number of poll workers. We worked to fight disinformation. We worked to put in place health and safety standards, and crucially, to recruit a whole new generation of poll workers, but also to make sure that we maximized early and absentee voting, where in Ohio, over half of the votes were already cast before the polls even opened on election day. Of course, critical to this effort as well was the cybersecurity work that we had been doing over the last year and a half to make sure that Ohio was ready for threats that not only come from foreign actors, but also domestic cyber criminals as well. And again, as a result, we ran a smooth election that not only was honest and accessible, but also broke all participation records. We had over 5.8 million Ohioans participate in the election, and that's just so far. Of course, we still, like all states do, have outstanding provisional and absentee ballots to still be resolved. And so a record-breaking year for Ohio, and something that we're enormously proud of.
Awesome. Tim, can we have you go next? We'll talk a lot more about the elections, I think.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tim Romer. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for the state of Arizona. Thank you so much for the opportunity. As the Secretary mentioned, now that we've moved beyond the election, which our team put all hands on deck to assist our Secretary of State's office, now, what we've been working on and what continues to keep me up at night is just the 36,000 state of Arizona employees that we have that are working round the clock, nonstop, teleworking, and all the vulnerabilities that they're facing out there and the different types of attacks that are coming at us. So really, I think what keeps me up at night most busy is just trying to protect those 36,000 employees, help them make good decisions, arm them with good information, continue to partner with our federal partners at FBI and DHS, and continuously improve every day, because cybersecurity changes so much every day. If you think you got it figured out one day, you're going to wake up with a rude awakening the next day.
That sounds right. And last but not least, Rita.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for having me today. My name is Rita Reynolds, and I'm the Chief Technology Officer for the National Association of Counties. And my role is really interacting and working with the county CIOs and IT directors all across the United States. I've done this type of work for many years, and it was within the state of Pennsylvania, and now I have the opportunity here at the national level. And just getting to know the IT directors, the CIOs, and their hard work and their preparations that they went through to be ready for the election, they're to be applauded. There's a lot that they have to be responsible for in supporting the election office, and those last minute requests, even the day of, are critical in ensuring that they support the elections properly. Now that the dust is settling and folks are able to get back to a little bit of the norm, as we're calling it, we are refocusing and looking to what 2021 is going to bring. And a recent survey that we're conducting is showing that cyber is still at the top of the list. It's a very critical component to providing the strong infrastructure for the counties. And through that, I would say that the partnerships with state and at the national level are very critical and have definitely improved even from the 2016 timeframe. So I'm looking forward to more conversation there in the rest of this panel presentation. So thank you.
Thanks so much for all of you taking some time out of what's keeping you so busy to talk about it with us. So, originally when we conceived this webinar, we were going to talk about infrastructure in general and how remote work is being affected by the COVID pandemic. So why don't we back up a little bit and, go back a couple of months before all the selection stuff happened, and talk about what some of those challenges were then, adjusting to all of the social distancing that we needed to do to keep folks healthy. What was that like in Ohio? Did you have infrastructure in place? What were some of the things that you needed to do to adjust, and how did you stand as it got closer to the election and today?
Yeah, so this is something that we were quite well prepared for in many ways, maybe without even realizing it, as we all had to kind of adjust to this new scenario starting in March. I have about 120 personnel that work in my office. Of course, as the Secretary of State, I serve not only as the Chief Elections Officer for Ohio, but I also fulfill a crucial role of being that sort of front door for any businesses. So business filings occur through our office, new corporations or LLCs, also notary commissions, ministers' licenses, a whole variety of things. Well, because over the years, Ohio has transitioned more and more of that work to be an online filing that, of course, has a back-end processing here by people that normally would work in this office, we were really well equipped to send those folks home to work remotely. At one point, we literally had our mailroom van, which is the vehicle that we had at our disposal. And we were picking up scanners and printers and desktops and computers and driving them around to people's houses and dropping them off so that they could get set up to begin working from home. And our team has reacted quite well to that. In fact, if you look at our business services division, their productivity has been just as high, and in many cases higher than it was when they were working at the office. And that's a quantifiable thing. We can see how quickly they're processing applications and getting them handled, and how low they've maintained a low error rate as far as data entry and that kind of thing goes as well. Now, there's a human component to this, and for many in our workforce, the family logistics obviously has to come into play. Take myself, for example. I've got 3 small children, and so working from home can be exceedingly difficult because children don't respect boundaries when it comes to these kind of things. But for our workforce that are empty nesters or who live alone, there are different concerns. The isolation of being all by yourself and not having the social interaction that you would get by coming to work. And so we've instituted practices such as, daily meetings of the teams. So our subordinate leaders throughout the organization have daily meetings, conversations that just start with checking in and see how everybody's doing and having a conversation about what you did over the weekend, and then get into the work of the office and things that need to be done. Of course, the thing that's harder to do remotely, I've found, is the kind of creative collaboration work. There are ways to do it, but it doesn't always work as well as when you can put people in the same room. But we found ways to adapt to that as well. Certainly for our elections division, as we got closer and closer to election day, there was just more need to physically bring people into the building. And of course, those were managed smartly to maintain social distancing, mask requirements, hand washing, all of the things that we all know employees were required to take their temperature before reporting to work and stay home from work if they had any known exposure and that kind of thing. Of course, also there are functions of this office that can't be done remotely, such as operating our customer service desk, where Ohioans still expect to be able to come in and transact their business in person. Of course, our mailroom function continues to have to happen in person to process that. And so those adaptations have been made. And I'm really proud of our cybersecurity team as well, for working to make sure that we have the right multi-factor authentication, the sort of human aspect of this, what I call the human firewall, making sure that all the members of our team understand the role that they play in protecting the integrity of our systems, even though they're working from their own kitchen table now, for example. That responsibility is more important than it ever was.
Absolutely. It's a good perspective. And Tim, driving around to deliver electronics to folks sounds definitely pretty hands-on, but securing those devices and not taking any chances in a remote work environment is pretty important, I would assume. Tim, can you speak to some of the other challenges that you faced as CISO? Secretary mentioned their cybersecurity office. What are some of the specific things you had to do to adjust quickly to, getting everyone to work remotely?
Yeah, well, first off, compliments to Secretary LaRose, because he certainly, as a Secretary of State, he certainly understands cybersecurity, which is really impressive. He understands exactly, the importance of that human firewall, investing in his people. And that was really important for us. We're also really lucky to have a great Secretary of State, Katie Hobbs in Arizona. Myself personally and my office partnered with Secretary Hobbs going back to December of last year. So we really spent an entire year sharing threat information with her and her team and all of the county election directors. So the threat intelligence was really important, helping them come up with their incident response plans, helping them practice those, understand, meeting with their heads of communications and others, making sure everybody was part of that, and helping them get the assessments and cybersecurity tools that they needed to feel comfortable, both in the Secretary of State's office in all 15 counties. I was really proud of our state because we've got a fantastic governor who happens to be a Republican, who I work for. And then our second highest elected official is our Secretary of State. We don't have a lieutenant governor. Katie Hobbs is a Democrat. And I think what's great is we showed that cybersecurity and election security are not a partisan issue. We partnered as closely as we possibly could in a nonpartisan way. Secretary Hobbs and I testified to the House Elections Committee in Arizona on cybersecurity and election security going back to March before the pandemic hit. And a lot of the same things we spoke to with the state legislature then in March is what we doubled down on as the pandemic took effect and we moved into teleworking. We were talking about ways that we were sharing threat information, how we were working with our local law enforcement partners. We had regular calls then scheduled with our FBI officials in the cybersecurity office here in Phoenix, the Department of Homeland Security as well. And we would come together regularly. The only difference was once the pandemic hit, we had to do those meetings virtually. We couldn't do them physically in person anymore, which was tough. But we continued to have those meetings move on, sharing that threat information, making sure everybody was armed with the information they needed. And we wanted to make sure every county also knew exactly what we were seeing. So as soon as we started seeing a specific type of advanced persistent threat at the state level, a specific type of phishing attack, we would share those indicators of compromise with the Secretary of State's office in all 15 counties and the federal officials to make sure that not only were we helping protect Arizona, but we wanted the federal partners to be able to get that information out to all the other 49 states as well and be able to help protect them in the cases that they were building at a national level. So those were some of the ways we partnered on election security. On the specifically cybersecurity and teleworking front, I think policies and procedures are one of the areas that often go unnoticed and underappreciated when it comes to people talking about what solutions did you put in place to manage the teleworkforce? How did you secure them? A lot of it, as the secretary mentioned, that human firewall. Governor Ducey invested in us last year. He gave me the authority to mandate annual statewide cybersecurity awareness training for every single state of Arizona employee. That helped, because as soon as they started teleworking, they knew and they were prepared for the amount of increased attacks that were coming after them. They knew how to protect themselves, and that really truly helped. But the policies and procedures is often the area that it's not real exciting, but it really works. And it's things like saying you're not allowed to use your personal devices for work purposes. You know, we can't be commingling those devices. I mean, our employees were not happy to hear it from me when we put it down, but we couldn't have somebody going home to work and saying, hey, I'm going to work from home now. It's going to be okay. I'm just going to take out this old desktop computer I haven't plugged in 10 years, and I'm going to plug it in, and I'm going to connect securely, I'll put that in quotes, securely back to the state network. And it's like, no, because if your device is already compromised, there's nothing we can really do to help. So we had to put those policies and procedures in place. No matter how many people got upset at us, we knew it was the right thing to do. We had the support of the governor. And that was really, you know, that leadership really started from the top, and that investment in cybersecurity going back to last year. So that I would say was probably our biggest help.
Thanks. Now, Rita, these state officials at the top of the operations here sound pretty confident, and you know, it seems like you guys had a very smooth sort of transition. But I'm curious what you were hearing from counties and other localities. And you know, I understand that the information sharing flowed down to the counties from the states, but Rita, what were you hearing, you know, in the other direction about challenges folks were facing on the ground, and how they were working with, were able to work with states?
No, thank you. And I was sitting here listening from that state perspective, and I'm like, wow, it would be so nice just to have one entity to worry about. And realizing that there's 3,069 counties out there, and they're all at different levels of that cyber maturity and even infrastructure maturity. So what happened early on, say the March, April timeframe, NACO we had just started a discussion group, and we have over 500 county members on that from the IT world. It started in about the February timeframe, just in time for COVID. And what was really encouraging to see was the posting of questions and comments of how the counties were handling the whole virtual environment, because that's what everyone had to do. We had to pivot, and pivot fast. And while it was regional in terms of its spread, everyone was sharing, here's where we're at, here's what we're doing. A lot of the, as was said earlier, we called it desktop to go for their employees, where they just basically boxed up the desktop and sent it home with the employee. And many had the VPN in place, many had licensing in place to a point for certain virtual meeting platforms. So they were able to quickly ramp up and add the additional licensing. Phone calls were critical, and that I saw is somewhat of a difficult path for some, because there are still PBX systems out there in use. And so that makes it a little harder to forward things like phone calls. But the overwhelming response was sharing best practices. Myself and some others at NACO, we put together those best practices into a virtual meeting guide, best practices guide. And later in the summer, I had a focus group with county CIOs and HR, and put together a telework guidelines toolkit. And that has helped tremendously, because at this point, we all know this is going to continue for a while longer. I think the biggest challenge, which from the state perspective, I know Washington State, for example, has had to address this, has been broadband. And when you get into the rural counties and even some of the urban counties, you have employees that literally cannot get a good, strong broadband connection into their home. And so when VPN was required, that made it even more difficult. So we're still, of course, strategizing and talking about how to deal with that going forward. And that is a 2021 priority for NACO. Recently formed a broadband task force, because the reality is that broadband in many ways is a utility, but it's not recognized as such. And so that is, I believe, going to continue to be a challenge for counties. From the election perspective, as I said, many of them are engaged and have a very strong relationship with the state, the Department of State and the CISO there, and the national involvement with the Homeland Security Situation Awareness Center that was open all day on Election Day was very helpful. A lot of sharing of what IP addresses should I be blocking, and quickly turning around and blocking some suspect ones, so that during the day and even days after, they can ensure a secure environment for posting of election results, unofficial election results, that is. So overall, like I said, it's been somewhat of a struggle in some areas because of broadband. Moving forward, and I don't know if this is the right place to add it, but there's two areas of focus for 2021 in addition to broadband, and that is multi-factor authentication. I recently did a survey of a state, and 61% of the counties that responded, counties that responded was a significant number of 61% have multi-factor authentication in place. Well, that leaves 39% that don't. And I expect that percentage to hold as I take it nationally. So we have some work to do there. The other area is with what I will refer to as DMARC. I know that was mentioned in a number of media outlets last week and the week before on how that would cut down on phishing emails. And they're right. The reality is that for a local government to implement DMARC can be a little challenging in terms of understanding and knowing what needs to be done. So we'll be focusing on helping make that training, there's free training out there, provided at a national level, and making that available to all local government. But there's a lot of work to be done, but I will say overall that counties are in a better place now than they were 4 years ago, especially when it comes to cybersecurity. And we wouldn't have been able to pivot as fast as the counties did in the spring if it weren't for that attention.
Thanks, Rita. Yeah, I think we can probably have an entirely separate webinar about rural broadband. As you know, we've been trying to close the digital divide for a while now. But so I'm curious, so you mentioned MFA and, training for phishing. I think Tim mentioned that as well. I'm curious, before we shift to talking a little bit more about the elections and challenges there, were there, either from the secretary or from Tim, were there things, that you gravitated to in making the transition from the pandemic that kind of stuck with you and will, I guess lessons learned about what are some of those things that you think will be more of a staple now? Let's start with the secretary.
Yeah, so a lot of these things, thank you for the question, Miriam. A lot of these things really aren't pandemic specific, but the experiences that we've had, and I think that everybody knows this, you've got to have redundancy. You've got to have backup plans in place. I mean, I spent 10 years in the military, and that's just a part of the culture there, is that you will always have a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C, and that kind of thing. And we found that here in Ohio's largest county on Election Day, when the overnight download of voter data did not download into the electronic poll books, effectively these iPads that are used to check voters in on Election Day. And of course, that has to happen overnight because it's got to be the most up-to-date list of who's voted already early, who's voted absentee, and that kind of thing. And when that download failed overnight, as can happen with electronic equipment, our Franklin County Board of Elections here was ready to switch over to the old paper poll books that we had used for decades in Ohio and everybody was well familiarized with. When I first ordered the boards of elections to have that backup available back in the summer, I heard a lot of grumbling. They said, oh, we're going to have to go out and buy $200 worth of 3-ring binders, and we're going to have to print all these reams of paper to have the paper backup. But we're glad that we told them to have that backup plan in place, because at about 5 a.m. on Tuesday morning, one of our largest boards of elections was able to say, okay, this download isn't going to happen in time. Let's stop wasting time on this, and let's get the paper backups out there. And all of their polling locations opened on time as a result of it. So it's just planning for those kind of contingencies is just crucial in a pandemic or anytime.
Yeah, absolutely. And Director Krebs from the from CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency here, definitely called out Ohio as a great example of where that resilience paid off. I think the theme that I'm getting from this webinar is that leadership requires doing unpopular things sometimes. So, Tim, is there anything specific you'd like to add? I know that on a federal level, we talked a lot about cloud adoption to adjust to remote work, and there's a lot of people struggle with that sometimes about a lack of clarity about what their responsibilities are exactly in securing cloud environments. That's just an example, but Tim, is there anything else that you sort of learned from this, or were you guys just didn't really learn anything? It was all stuff you knew from the get-go.
No, we definitely learned a lot. To answer your cloud security question first, yes, the cloud has great security protocols in place. It's a great process and tool for on the security side, because the way that it slivers and stores information. It's great on being a cloud first state because it really helps us prevent ransomware. One of the top 3 things to do to prevent from ransomware are, back up your information, make sure it's offline, make sure it's somewhere else. And, a good cloud environment really helps us do that. We do need to continue to focus nationwide on how we secure third-party vendors. They're probably the biggest target right now when it comes to cloud security, similar to the way the Target breach happened several years ago. If somebody wants to come after a large organization, they're not going to come right after you. They know you're well defended. They're going to go after one of your third parties that may have access to your information. They're going to go around you that way. So we're continuing to prioritize and work, strongly at the national level to work on how our third parties secure information in the cloud. But it is a great resource. As far as your question regarding lessons learned, I think the first lesson we learned was going back a year ago, we got a National Governors Association Policy Academy grant to come to Arizona and help us. Governor's office and the Secretary of State's office hosted all of our counties in Phoenix, where we prepared them for the threat intelligence briefings, the assessments, the incident response plans, the communications plans, the who to call in an emergency, helping them build those connections. We introduced our FBI cyber team in Arizona directly to the counties in case they needed resources. We kind of started connecting those trust relationships, building that trust ahead of time. But I'll tell you, the first thing the county leaders told us was, you all are almost too late. They said, we don't prepare for an election a year ahead of time. We prepare for elections years ahead of time. And I think that was the first lesson where we thought, hey, we're coming in, we've got a year, we're going to be really prepared. And they said, boy, we need to process these tools. We need to do assessments. We need to do our practices. We need to run through this environment. So what we started to shift our focus away from is the talking point of we were preparing for 2020, and we started just saying we're preparing for all future elections, because we wanted everything that we were doing and helping these counties and the Secretary of State's office and in general to prepare on cybersecurity. We wanted them to be long-term, sustainable, have that continuity, and be able to continue to take that path forward. One of the ways we have to continue to invest in this and make this happen is kind of putting our money where our mouth is. So when I first came into this role about a year and a half ago, we didn't have any grants for our local counties to help them. We were able to get some Homeland Security grants to pass to our counties about $50,000, $60,000 the first year. And that helped some of our smaller rural counties. Well, we fortunately did a good job with that. We were able to ask for more and receive more grants. So we've now quadrupled that number for next year. So our counties in Arizona our department will continue to push more of this federal grant funding through our cybersecurity division. We'll be able to give them our cybersecurity tools like advanced endpoint protection. We're able to get them those licenses and those tools to the counties at the cheapest possible licensing agreement we could get, because we have those state purchasing power from the state procurement office. We're able to get those licenses at a fraction of the cost that those other counties would be able to get ordinarily. And that all ties back into all types of security, and it's going to help us prepare for future elections, because with cybersecurity, you always worry about the weakest link. You worry about the weakest link, that one employee out of 36,000 that makes the mistake of clicking on the email, or the one person in the one rural county that, didn't have the tool or the training or the awareness and they did something. And the way we get ahead of that is continuing to invest in those counties so that we're not, the year before the election saying, here, let me help you with a cybersecurity assessment. Because once my team comes in and says, hey, you're not in a good position, we did your assessment, you have all these vulnerabilities and risk, it's kind of too late to do anything about it. But what that lesson learned was, okay, we did a pretty good job this time around. Let's continue to put our foot on the accelerator. Let's keep the momentum moving forward. Let's continue to invest in these things. And I think, the secretary made a great point at the beginning where it wasn't really luck that we had a lot of success in this country on election day. It was thanks to a lot of hard work, dedication from the 50 secretaries of state, from the 50 governors, from every county's leadership as well, that everybody came together and prioritized this. It wasn't by accident. And I think if I learned one thing from, meeting with the counties of last year was, don't stop helping us as soon as that election's over. Please continue to meet with us. Please continue to partner with us. And I think that's my biggest lesson learned. We gotta continue to help them.
That seems like a pretty safe lesson to have, which is fine. Now, you mentioned about elections not being a partisan issue, and I think we're all sort of relieved to have seen, especially CISA operate under those sort of principles as well. But when it comes to resources, that's not always the case in Congress, right? And a big part of the federal conversation, as you've seen around election security, is about how much money should go to states, what those resources should be used for, is it enough? So I wanted to get the state perspective on resources that the federal government has sent your way or could send your way, whether that's in terms of guidance from CISA or others, or actual money. Is it the fact that well, it's all nice and good, but can you show us the money, or show us the give us something tangible here? So I don't know if Rita can talk about the experience from the counties, about, where there might be gaps in federal resources, where you can benefit, where you think that local governments can benefit. And then I'd love to have both of the state officials weigh in as well.
Sure. It's a great question. And I will say that my experience in Pennsylvania is different than some others. So each state has handled being able to support counties in a different way. From a communication collaboration perspective, Pennsylvania has had a group of county and state folks that have gotten together for probably 5 years or so. We called it a Department of State's cybersecurity work group. And they continue to meet even after I left the state association. And I know that they're thriving and that relationship is very strong and very important, especially in terms of the needs and what the state can do for the counties. In Pennsylvania, they were able to put together a phishing subscription platform with a well-known vendor, made that available to, it started with just election staff, but it quickly became free for all county employees because of the relationship between the election office and the rest of the county. So from that point, the bigger question became monitoring. And there's at the national level, there's what are called Albert sensors that have been made available to different county government for a price. And I know it started out in Florida. They were able to basically provide that sensor for all the counties. Some other states worked to try and get that through with their budget cycle and couldn't do that. It has varied across the United States, which states have been successful and have made that monitoring tool available to the county government. And that is a challenge. It is a costly endeavor. There are some inexpensive ways to address monitoring, but not to the bigger perspective of what really is needed. So, if I had, I'll take two, if I had two topics to say at the federal level, it's being able to provide monitoring tools to county government to do that cyber monitoring. And also more money really needs to go into broadband. It is going to take a village to address that. I don't mean to keep harping on it, but broadband is critical in proper service delivery across the board, which indirectly does affect elections because of citizens being able to see the results, being able to access services that are available to them within the county. So those are the two that I see. And yes, counties would like the money to come directly to them. I need to say that. And it's no offense to the state, but sometimes I know states do a really good job looking at what are the needs, what are the criteria we need to put in place to disseminate the money, but sometimes there are exceptions. And so counties feel like their hands are tied in terms of how they need to spend those dollars specifically within their priorities.
See, this is why it's great to have you guys on, because you don't always get this kind of perspective when you're just talking to federal officials. Secretary LaRose, what would you say in response to that? How important is it for counties to have sort of things that they do attached to the spending, sort of similar to the conversation that we have up in the federal level, where it's very clear, for example, with elections, that states are in charge. And so there's been a lot of hesitation to attach strings, if you will, to the money. What's your take on that?
It's absolutely crucial to get the resources to where the action is. This mentality came from when I was in the Army. I was one of those trigger squeezers that was out there sort of on the front lines doing the work. And it would always be annoying when we were without some resource that we need. But then you go back to the headquarters and the people that have never had mud on their boots seem to have the latest, greatest stuff. That always annoyed me. And I said, if I'm in a position to allocate resources, we're going to push the resources to where the work actually happens. And in the context of elections, that is our county boards of elections, at least in Ohio. And by the way, that's a completely bipartisan endeavor. Tim talked about the great bipartisanship, and I'm not surprised. Of course, Governor Ducey was born in Ohio, so no surprise there. And of course, Katie Hobbs, your Secretary of State, is a dear friend of mine as well. So the elections officials, whether it's at the state level or at the county level, are first and foremost there to do the work of delivering free and fair elections, and partisan issues are generally left to the side when it's done right. What we've done is make sure that the vast majority of the resources that we've gotten through the several tranches of funding that have come from the federal government have gone out to the counties, whether it was HAVA money or whether it was our CARES Act money. And, the question came, would we like to see more resources? In a world of scarce resources, of course. But I will say that really it's about maximizing what we have. And for us, over 90% of the federal dollars that we got went straight out to the counties. And it was focused on action. When I came into office about 2 years ago, I noticed that there had been a lot of evaluations and studies done. We knew what was wrong. We didn't need to do another study or evaluation to find out where the counties were lacking. And so I really wanted to focus on implementing those studies that had been done in the past and fixing those holes, patching the fence, so to speak. And so what we did is we prioritized a list of things. We called it our cybersecurity directive. And I stood in front of our county elections officials association and said, in the next 6 months, you all are going to accomplish all of these things. And by January of 2020, Ohio will be 100% compliant with this list. And I won't hesitate to admit that they laughed at me. They just thought there's no way that they can get all that done, but they did. They pulled together in a bipartisan way, and they got it done. And so that HAVA money that we had was used for things like, making sure that we had multi-factor authentication in place, transitioning all of our counties to .gov domains. So all of their emails and all of their websites are on the trusted .gov domain. That's also good for fighting disinformation. Tell people to go to that trusted source of a .gov website. We were, I think, one of the first states or the first state in the nation to have an Albert sensor at every county board of elections. And by the way, also to have the monitoring for that paid for. The state covered the cost of that monitoring. That's an ongoing cost. But having an Albert sensor without the monitoring is like having an alarm system without monitoring. There's just no reason to do that. Also, SIM loggers so that we could go back and sort of forensically look at what happened when things did happen. All of our counties have those. Of course, the training for that human firewall that we all talked about, background checks. Tim talked about the danger of third-party vendors. This was a little controversial, but I mandated that all third-party vendors that serve boards of elections also submit to background checks and comply with our security directive, including having Albert monitors with some of these elections systems vendors to make sure that they are trustworthy as well. Of course, segmentation. A lot of our counties had everybody sort of on the same server, whether it's the county engineer or the county coroner or the county board of elections, and segmenting off elections so that they're not sort of vulnerable in that same environment. Just updating software and hardware to make sure that the latest stuff was running. I heard DMARC mentioned that was a requirement as part of our security directive for all of our boards of elections. But then beyond that work, and we just kind of prioritized that and said, here's the money, go do it. But we also were able to leverage other assets, and DHS has been a great one. The services that they offer, we put to use. But also in Ohio, we passed a bill, and this is something I worked on when I was in the state legislature that finally came to fruition more recently, to create the Ohio Cyber Reserve within our National Guard to recruit some of the best and brightest that we have in Ohio. It's a non-military function. These folks don't go to basic training, but it falls under the National Guard because the function that they perform is very similar. And so now we've stood that up in Ohio, and we have regional cyber reserve teams that stand ready to respond in a moment of crisis to help one of our county boards of elections or any entity of government respond in case the worst happens. And it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, I think we all know.
Thank you. So it sounds like there is a place for mandates in some situations. And we're running out of time, so I want to ask this question of Tim, because one of the very visible things that we saw CISA released was the ransomware guide, and as that ransomware is relevant to both elections and COVID and just in general. I wanted to ask about the role of cybersecurity insurance. How has that sort of affected the responses from states, when you're hit with something like that, and you're being told not to pay the ransom, but your data is being held hostage? It can be a very high pressure situation. And I know Tim has some opinions about this. So Tim, can you share those with us, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That's a great question. Yeah, I'm pretty passionate about this issue in not paying a ransom. I'm starting to see a trend nationwide, and I'm reading articles of these insurance companies paying ransoms right now. And it's really dangerous for all of us. Each time one of these ransoms is paid, it actually hurts all of us, not just in government, but the private sector as well. Look, the reason why cyber attacks are at such a huge increase right now is these criminals, whether they're part of an organization or not, they see an opportunity to come after us, whether it's the private sector or public sector. They think they can come after us, come after our essential services during a pandemic, and they have a better chance of getting paid and getting that ransom because they think, oh, this is so critical. These agencies can't be offline for even a minute right now. I'm going to attack a hospital system. We saw hospital systems being attacked and being hit with ransomware a couple weeks ago. It's really frustrating because what we have to do is we have to come together and say, no, we are preparing for this. We're practicing this. We're preparing, our information backups offline. We have a plan in place. Sure, cyber insurance is important and it's good to have, and it can be useful and helpful. But I'd love to see these insurance companies start, bonding together more with law enforcement, taking the advice of our federal partners and law enforcement and not paying, because I think it increases the amount of attacks. it also increases the premiums that we all have to pay because it makes cyber more expensive. And I'm not trying to, be too hard on the insurance companies, but I understand that the more they pay these out, the more they get to charge, the more their business and premiums go up. And I think the more we as the organizations get hurt in all this. So I'm not a fan of that. Arizona does not have a state law that says we can't do it, saying, we can or can't pay it. I know some states are looking at passing laws. I think some states have passed laws that specifically say no public money can be used to pay ransomware. And I think it's, a pretty decent idea. I'll leave that up to our state legislature, and the governor's office on how to hand that moving forward. But I am passionate that, we should not be paying these ransoms. It makes it worse. And then in closing, I would just say I'm really enjoying this and bonding with Secretary LaRose and Rita. I wish this was in person. I feel like if this was in person, a national event, we'd definitely be hanging out, afterwards in the lobby, because I'm in such agreement with so many things they've said. And what Rita was talking about on the Albert sensors hit the nail on the head. Those are so important to us at the state level, and our federal partners in Congress being able to invest in both the MSI stack and the Albert sensors are a huge help to the states, the counties, and everybody at the local level.
Miriam, can I add something on this? Because I've been pretty outspoken on this issue as well. And we've had a few counties in Ohio that have unfortunately fallen victim to ransomware attacks. Thankfully, not at the Board of Elections, but county government entities have. And not only, as Tim said, it's the classic paradigm of if you pay the hostage takers ransom, they're only inclined to take more hostages, right? But you're also making a deal with the devil. I mean, by definition, you're dealing with bad people that aren't trustworthy and may leave some sort of Trojan in your system or who knows what. But there's also the moral question of when you pay these folks, whatever, a couple $100,000 worth of Bitcoin, you're probably financing Boko Haram or some narco terrorism organization, folks that don't share our values as it relates to human rights, people that are involved in human trafficking and all manner of ugly things. Having served as an Army Green Beret and been in that role for 10 years, I can tell you that these are people you don't want to be sending a dime to.
Yeah, I completely agree. Those are great points as other reasons why we don't want to be paying the ransom. And then at the end of the day, a lot of people think that if you just pay the ransom, like the secretary noted, you're automatically going to get back in. They're going to leave Trojans in there. And if you didn't do a good job of having a company or yourselves and your own team go in and clear it out, it's like having somebody break into your physical building and saying, okay, we're going to pay, we're just going to change the locks or the security system. And you didn't sweep the entire building to make sure they weren't there anymore. You didn't make sure that you found which window they came in to fix it so it doesn't happen again. And they're going to come right back in and they're going to exploit you again. And so I could not agree more with the secretary there.
Yeah, it's a hazardous landscape.
Yeah, and Miriam, if I could add real quickly to the conversation, agree with all the points that have been made for sure. Taking it even to our third-party providers, and when one of them gets hacked, and we've already talked about that earlier, and do they have cyber insurance in place, and what decisions are they making to pay the ransom or not pay the ransom? Because that indirectly affects county government.
Absolutely. I mean, the role of third parties is a huge thing in general for cybersecurity. I mean, it seems like, we could talk for the rest of the day, and I really wish I could be hanging out with you guys too. There's obviously a lot to be said, but unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for today. So I'm going to turn things over now to Hillary Sippis and Jeffrey Phelan. And thank you again, all the panelists, for participating.
Thank you. Thank you.
Everybody.
Thanks so much, Miriam. And thank you to all the panelists. Really appreciate your time today. I thank all of the panelists for spending the past 45 minutes with us sharing your insights and your experience. I know this has been a crazy time for all of you, and we're just so appreciative of what you're doing. And maybe one day we can all meet in person, including you, Jeffrey. Jeffrey, thank you for joining us. I'm excited to be here with you.
No, this is great. It was great hearing Rita talk. I grew up in a little town called Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania, and used to play baseball at Messiah College. So
I went to Messiah as well.
yeah, I saw that in your bio. So I graduated from Cumberland Valley High School.
Small world.
Yep.
See, we're not able to go to live conferences, but at least we're all able to connect virtually.
That's right.
So Jeffrey, let's get started. I think let's start with an easy one, right? This shouldn't be too hard. Can you just tell our audience who you are, what you do, and maybe a little bit more about Rubrik?
Sure. And, I really want to do it within the context of the discussion we just had. So one of the things, so I work for a company called Rubrik. Rubrik is a data management platform. It's a software-defined data management platform, and we're used all across the intelligence community in the Department of Defense. And one of the primary uses that we're deployed for is to combat ransomware. So obviously the last discussion that we had today and throughout the conversation, my background is in network security. I worked for Northrop Grumman for 6 years there, primarily focused in cybersecurity and artificial intelligence and machine learning. So we had a dedicated counter-espionage team there that guarded the stealth platforms, and that group would actually author the Chinese military cyber report to Congress every year. So, there are lots of threats, as everyone's talked about, and my job really is to come in and talk to organizations who understand that they need to modernize the infrastructure, and whether they're going to do it in their own data centers and their own infrastructures, or if they're going to ultimately go to the cloud. And my job is to help come in and help them understand the complexity, try to simplify that, reduce costs, and give them the ability to be able to take advantage of the latest technologies. And from a ransomware perspective, one of our core intellectual property areas is what we call an immutable file system. So this idea that if you are hit by ransomware, they're not going to be able to encrypt or hold hostage your data files, right? Which is very important. So we've had that happen, and we're very happy because we've been growing very, very quickly because of this capability that we have. And so certain, at the state and local level, for example, the city of Durham had our technology. They were hit by ransomware. And normally it takes anywhere from 3 to 7 days or even longer. We've heard 30 days for organizations to recover. They've literally been back up and running in a matter of minutes or an hour. So it's a transformational capability that we've really been able to help customers with. So we're really focused on helping them modernize their infrastructure. And that's really what my job to do. Give them an idea of the art of the possible. How do you do that in a very secure way and do it within their budgets and within policy and governance?
That's great. And I think we can all agree that this year particularly, it's presented no shortage of massive global challenges, ransomware being one, but lots of other challenges. Can you maybe share with us how these challenges have made your work and Rubrik's work more urgent and really more important than ever?
Well, it's very interesting. When our company started about 6 years ago, we had founders from some of the large tech companies that everyone's heard of. And in particular, we had some folks who came over from Google. And you think about Google's mission is where they want to make the world's information searchable. We effectively want to be able to manage that data. So part of what we started to look at was how do we create what we call a hyperscale capability to make data available everywhere. And with the pandemic and other things that are going on, what's happened, if you talk to healthcare providers, for example, they've gone from high touch to zero touch with their customers, right? And in those organizations, all that data is historically right at their fingertips. So it's in the office, it's in the clinic, it's in the hospital, it's in paper files. They can get to it, and they can look their customer, their patients right in the eyes, right? Well, that's happened in every single area of business, right? Whether it's in the hospitality industry or whether it's in government or if it's in hospitals and healthcare and everywhere else. So this idea where security just needs to be where I can see it. It's in this box, it's in this location, it's in a facility I control, has completely changed, right? Now the data has to be secure everywhere, but it has to be accessible everywhere. And oh, by the way, you're not allowed to have access to my information, right? And I need to make sure that this third party can't have access to it. So part of what we've been doing is help folks understand that the historical approach to managing data. So in the government, you always hear this concept of data as a strategic asset, right? And if you're going to treat that like your crown jewels, you have to really treat it like the crown jewels, right? And so we're very fortunate that we've been looking at this. We've got some very sophisticated investors who've been really doing a lot of just incredible work in the technology space. And they saw this problem. They saw how data was stored and managed in all these large organizations. And they said, we have to be able to change that paradigm. So we're talking to people on a regular basis. And to the Secretary's point earlier, we do an enormous amount of work with the U.S. military. And our technology is deployed at what we call the tactical edge. So it's in Humvees, it's on airplanes, it's in backpacks, it's wherever they're gathering sensor data, right? So in the healthcare space, they're taking temperatures and doing diagnostic work. But for the warfighter, as we call it, and that's really our pedigree, now everybody, healthcare workers, in many respects, they're sort of the tip of the spear, right? They're the warfighter in that respect. So you're getting DoD and intelligence level capabilities that are now being dispersed into the commercial market at the state and local side of things as well. And that's very exciting for us because, you know, the conversation today as we work with CISOs and organizations is that security piece and that defense piece has got to be there. And if you talk about plan A and plan B, well, it used to be that the storage infrastructure was the line of last defense. Well, if the ransomware comes in and locks that up, now you're in trouble. And the Department of Treasury has just issued an advisory telling you to not pay the ransom, or you could be held liable for that. So, you know, it's a complex environment, and we're working very, very hard to try to help customers and users understand that.
So I think what's unique about you, it seems like you've had a lot of experience with your position at Rubrik and even elsewhere, working with lots of different organizations. Can you perhaps, I think, you know, everyone always wants to hear case studies, best practices. Route 50, we've been founded on that premise to share best practices and case studies. Can you just tell us about maybe some of the cyber specific successes that you're seeing in the state and local government?
Well, certainly I think organizations that are forward leaning, and it sounds like, for example, in Arizona and Ohio, you know, they've got strong leadership, right? So from a best practices perspective, in the corporate world, the CISO wasn't always part of the board of directors. They didn't report in, right? So organizations have to be able to give their security people a seat at the table, and they have to give them the ability, you know, they have to give them a veto and say, no, we're not going to do that, right? So it comes, you know, whether it's a financial incentive or it's a brand incentive or other things that they need to do. So what we're finding in different state and local enterprises is that organizations that are forward-leaning, they understand this. Sometimes they go there on their own because the leadership understands the importance. Sometimes they're forced there. They've had a bad situation. Sometimes the lawyers and the insurance companies are saying, you're going to have to do this or we're not going to insure you, right? You have directors and officers insurance now where they have to sign off on the cybersecurity plan. So it used to be, oh, I don't understand that. So I think we're seeing it in hospitals and healthcare organizations, so large healthcare providers and hospitals, particularly where they have doctors and clinicians and patients all coming in. It's a little bit of a mosh pit of problems, right? Everybody's piling in. There's a lot of ways that adversaries can get in there. So we look at strong leadership, dedicated teams, and dedicated budgets, obviously. I think vetting people, you don't have to spend a ton of money, but you have to be smart in terms of how you're applying technology and applying that budget. And I guess the last one is that organizations that adopt a simple proposition, which is trust nothing and suspect everything. And if you do that, it changes how you buy technology. It changes how you train users. It changes how you educate your stakeholders. And if you take that basic approach, it really helps you look at things a little bit differently, right? So yeah, the vendor may say some really cool things, but you know what? We need to see the empirical data to back that up. And if you don't have the people internally, again, trust but verify, make sure that you've got that specific data backing up the claims that people are making.
That's great. I like it. Trust but verify.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're getting a little bit towards the end of our time together.
Sure.
And I always like to end looking ahead. So can you just tell us how you and Rubrik are planning to deliver your services while also innovating, right? I know during this time, not only are you helping government solve their challenges, but as a company, you're continuing to innovate. So how are you doing that to continue solving the challenges across all levels of government, across maybe next year, the next 2 years?
Well, one of the things that we're doing is that we like to see where best practices are being utilized across the landscape, right? And then bring that in. So historically, this problem has been contained in people's environments, right? In their data centers and in infrastructures they manage. Now they're pushing data out. They're going to AWS and Azure and other clouds, and they're very, very large, but they don't have a way to really look into that. If there's a problem, you can't go to the AWS data center and pound on the door and say, hey, I need to see my servers. They don't let you do that. So what we're trying to do is to provide customers with the same level of trust, same level of assurance and ease of use that they're accustomed to in their own environment, but literally doing that on a global basis. So if I'm sitting in Washington, D.C., and I have constituents or users that are sitting in Korea or Japan or halfway around the world, I still have to deliver a service to them. I have to make sure that it's secure. It still has to be affordable. And I need to know that I've got access to my data in real time. So being able to provide that security and access to data and reliability across a global scale in real time is a non-trivial exercise where you have dependencies on power grids, networking infrastructure, third-party vendors, hardware, software, human errors, and things like that. So you have to build a lot of redundancy, a lot of fail-safe mechanisms into place. And we're starting to use a lot of artificial intelligence and machine learning techniques to fill in a lot of the manual, what I call the clerical aspects of managing infrastructure, so that you can now have machines doing that work and have your people with the big brains really working on the hard problems, right? And that's delivering services. So those are areas where we're really trying to innovate. And again, as you start trying to do that, around the world in real time, it gets very, very challenging.
Well, Jeff, I think that brings us to the end of our time. Is there anything else you want to add in closing?
Well, I think just in general, especially the conversation today, there are a lot of really smart people working on securing our infrastructure. They've got real scar tissue. They've got real life's lessons. It's not someone walking around waving their hands with PowerPoint. So people should feel very good. We have that same experience when we talk to the military and to our intelligence officers and people running the government. We've got really, really smart people. So despite what we see on TV all the time, there's a lot of really competent people taking care of us. So it's exciting for us to see.
That's great. I would say I do feel a little bit more secure today than maybe I have this week. So I appreciate you're helping us feel a little bit more secure in the work that Rubrik's doing, and then our panelists as well. So Jeffrey, thank you so much. We've come to the end of our time today. I want to thank you. I want to thank Secretary LaRose, Rita, Tim, for such a fabulous conversation earlier. And thank you to our audience for tuning in. We do these for you. We want to provide information to help you do your jobs better. So thank you for continuing to tune in. This event wouldn't be possible without the support of our underwriter, Rubrik and Jeffrey. So again, thanks. This full event and all of our events, as we've moved into this virtual world, are recorded, and you will all receive a link to watch it again in your email inbox later this week. So I would just say keep an eye out for that. And I know that not everyone can join at a certain time during the day, so feel free to share it with any of your colleagues. Thanks again, everyone. Again, my name's Hillary Serpis. I'm the publisher of Route 50, and I really just want to thank you for joining us. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time.